All right. Cool. So thanks everyone for taking the time to come watch all of the Hashi talks and mine and all the other great ones today. This talk is called How to Build a Usable Terraform Provider in 20 Hours. So as mentioned, who am I? My name is Robert Ross. People like to call me Bobby Tables. That's what I am on Twitter, GitHub, and every other social media platform. I am the co-founder and CEO of FireHydrant, an incident management platform. So my background is I write software. I've been writing software for many years. My last two jobs before FireHydrant and many more before that is I did work at DigitalOcean and I worked at Namely HR. I'm a big fan of automation. A lot of the software that I have written in my career has really been for my peers and my software peers around me. And I was in the room when Terraform was actually being shown to DigitalOcean pre-release. And I really was interested in the tool and the project. I was one of the earliest ones to open up an issue on it. I had the number 60 issue back in July of 2014 for some DigitalOcean specific things, because I really wanted to try it out on the platform when I was working there. And it's a great tool, and I've loved using it ever since. And that's what this talk is going to go into a little bit. So I built a Terraform provider while live streaming every line of code and bug. Those numbers are almost equal at some points of the stream. And I did it from my desk at home. At one point, I actually was on a lake and brought all of my recording equipment and live streaming equipment and actually did it from a pier on a lake. And there was people fishing behind me while I was streaming. It was a very fun experience. And the overall goal of this stream was to be able to have a usable Terraform provider in about 10 2-hour episodes for FireHydrant. So FireHydrant incident management platform. We wanted to have a Terraform provider for it. And what will come to light here is how do you do that in live with 2 hours each episode 10 times. So some known challenges that I knew going into this. Number one, I've never made a Terraform provider before, but not before this. I've used it plenty of times, but never had made a provider for Terraform. So first and most obvious challenge. I haven't written Go full-time in over a year. When you start a company, you start to lose some of the time that you can write code and do the things that, and doing it full time becomes very challenging and almost impossible. So I hadn't written Go in full time in about a year. So dealing with things like Go modules, some of the new packages that had come out, there was a whole bunch of things that had changed around that I wasn't totally aware of, but dove in anyways. There's a level of performance anxiety that kind of comes with doing it live. I am not a news broadcaster. I just said, we'll do it live and it'll be fun. And, that added a level of anxiety I was not totally prepared for while building the provider. And number four, if I didn't say it before, I've never made a Terraform provider before. So, let's just make a video stream and build a Terraform provider after not writing Go for a while. What could possibly go wrong? But we managed to do it. So, preparing for this performance of sorts, where did I kind of start? And where I recommend everyone here watching, if you're planning on building one, starts. HashiCorps, do the tutorial, don't skim it. And when I say don't skim it, that comes directly from experience of me going, I got this. So I skimmed through the HashiCorps tutorial, thinking I've got this. And what I started realizing is Terraform is a very powerful tool. And when you have a powerful tool, power a lot of the times has complexity involved with it. And it wasn't something that I could just read and be like, yeah, no problem, I can do this. You can't understand how Terraform works skimming a tutorial. You just can't. You can maybe understand fundamentals, but you really have to get it under your fingertips to really know how to do this. You must follow along with some tutorial. HashiCorp is the officially supported one. I highly recommend everyone do that one before anything else. Don't do what I did. HashiCorp put a lot of love into their tutorials. Don't make Hashi folks Hashi sad. So lesson number one that I kind of learned, I learned this, I think, on like episode 2, and why being dry might not be a good idea. And when I say dry, all caps, I do mean don't repeat yourself, very common software term. And so at times, my software instincts actually started kind of working against me, building the provider. I try to write code nearly to a fault. In my career, I got really into best software practices. And sometimes when I was writing the Terraform provider, I shouldn't have been doing some of these like instincts. I shouldn't have been acting on them. The Terraform SDK dry code might actually be too dry and give you really bad beef jerky. And it just becomes really hard to kind of chew and enjoy and have a good time building this provider. To add an extremely contrived analogy to this. So my example here is that there are data sources in Terraform and there are resources in Terraform. And there's a shared type in the Terraform SDK, obviously in Go, where you define your schema. So on the right side, you can see that there's a schema here. This is for a service within FireHydrant. Pretty simple, has an ID, a name, and a description. And in my Terraform provider, I was making a data source for a service. I was making one for a resource. And both of them have the same schema. So I said, why not just use the same, I can define it as a variable and I'll just reuse it and it'll be fine. And I think it took about an hour and a half before I realized that Terraform doesn't actually like you doing those types of things. You should actually redefine your schema for both data sources and for resources. And there were a couple of times where I stumbled across this. And I realized that being dry when you're kind of writing your Terraform provider, typically I'll go like twice before I try to not repeat myself and I'll create an abstraction. My recommendation, try to go like 4 or 5 times and then create your abstraction. There are a lot of like subtle differences between data sources, resources within Terraform that you might hit when you try to be dry. So don't abstract too early. Even if you're like really confident. Fairly generic advice. I was hitting way more walls than I should have. Once I broke my habit and just kind of fell back into good old copying and pasting, I know, shiver, things went much smoother. So if you're first time building your Terraform provider, don't be scared of kind of copying and pasting. It's okay. Lesson number 2, your API schema is your provider's schema. So what does that mean? Don't abstract away the schema of your API. So if you have a JSON API or whatever API you're interacting with your Terraform provider, your Terraform resource schemas should map to what the API is. There's a few reasons for this, but generally abstracting away that underlying API schema within your provider is going to make maintenance of that provider kind of hard and unwieldy. Creating a transform to map to a different schema in Terraform is really error prone. If you think like ETLs, extract, transform, load, you basically have one of those for every single one of the endpoints in your API. If you're trying to have a different schema in Terraform, it's going to make things really error prone. It's really confusing. I don't recommend it. So try to stick to the same schema as your API. Don't reinvent the wheel. And you can see like I ended up sometimes in kind of transform function hell land. I do not recommend going to transform function hell land. It is not a fun place to be. And here's some live footage from transform function hell land. It's just disastrous and fiery balls everywhere. Lesson number 3, embrace acceptance tests early. So what I did is I was moving quick and I was kind of fumbling my way through this in the very, first 2-3 episodes. And I had a little script that I wrote called quickredo.sh. I made it executable, I chmodexed it. And what I did is I went back a directory, ran a make install command, which was its own own whole thing, to rebuild the Terraform provider binary, popped out of it, initialized in a directory that I had example Terraform resources, ran a plan, and that was my way of testing that the resource code that I was making was giving me the results that I wanted in a Terraform plan. And this was, honestly, this was fine to get started. This actually worked okay. I was able to move pretty fast. The intent was to allow me to build the Terraform provider, test it against a real Terraform module, see the results. While my intentions were honorable and they had good results in the early days, after a couple of resources, my results were getting dampened pretty exponentially. So what I did is I switched to the acceptance testing framework inside of Terraform. And what was wrong with the quick redo is it's not really how people use Terraform. It's not a natural thing. It's not documented. It doesn't test the entire life cycle. With the acceptance testing portion of the SDK, it will test like a teardown, like a Terraform destroy. It'll actually test that part of it for you as well. You have to add like a check that it worked, but for the most part, it's going to do it for you. It's not a part of the official documentation and tool chain, and CI, like no CI, absolutely none. So acceptance tests, once I started kind of getting into them, I realized, oh, I should have just been doing this earlier. There's a bunch of assertion matchers functions that kind of come with the SDK and Terraform, and it actually makes it really easy to kind of check that your state and your resources are correct. So really recommend just try to do this earlier than not. Yeah, so allows you to quickly write tests, assert the state. It will hit, one thing to keep in mind, it is an acceptance test. It is going to hit a live something. So don't like add a production key. That wouldn't be good. Like have a test sandbox app or something to do that, which is what I did, and it worked very well. Because things will break. I have a sandbox on FireHydrant now that just has like orphaned resources all everywhere. So yeah, avoid that. Lesson number 4, and this was like a feely, like kind of gut feely thing that I had to get over here. You are going to type the word interface a lot. If you're a Gopher, if you've been writing Go for a while, you kind of know that interface without any, just interface to be able to say anything is, you try to avoid that as much as you can. Go is a strongly typed language. You want to kind of avoid this. However, due to the nature of how kind of Terraform works under the hood, you end up having to type it a lot to kind of convert from this structured data in Terraform state to what you want it to actually be. And it felt so weird at first. I was like, I felt like I was doing something wrong. I was interfacing with my own self-doubt. And what I had to kind of eventually realize is like, this is kind of how Terraform works. And once I had that acceptance, I came to it, my dev speed increased pretty substantially. I started anticipating interfaces in my provider code and avoided tripping myself up. There were a couple of moments where I just had assumptions. I was like, I bet it's this signature, and it ended up being right. And then it was like a happy, dopamine moment once I kind of figured it out. Lesson number 5, use other Terraform examples out there of sufficient size to learn more. You can use mine you can use the FireHydrant one for like maybe getting started, but if you're in the weeds of a Terraform provider, there are some like very well-maintained ones that have been out there forever. I would recommend just using those as a extended extra learning. The AWS provider. I don't know how GitHub loads the page for the AWS provider. I don't know how many files it is, but basically every single AWS resource that exists ever has a data source and a resource file. So it's like 2x the number of things that Amazon can do in file count. I learned a ton about file structure, naming conventions, etc., just kind of by reading the source. And it actually kind of confirmed a lot of my some of the things that I was assuming. I was able to assume something, kind of go check my assumption in the Amazon provider and go, oh yes, that is how this works. Any problem that I was really hitting, there was something in the Amazon. There was someone that was helping along with the build of this provider during the live chat. If I really got blocked by something, I think 99% of the time there was a link dropped in the chat to like unblock me. It was to the Amazon resource. It's a really, really monstrous application for Terraform providers. Lesson number 6, provider documentation. I was dreading documenting this. I wasn't documenting it along the way. No way. I wasn't doing that live. No one would watch that. I think that'd be very boring. But what was nice, what was a nice discovery is that there's actually a tool that will just do it for you. And what it does is it'll actually compile your Terraform provider. It's a CLI tool, TF plugin docs. It'll compile your provider for you, and it'll kind of check the schema that gets exposed by your provider. And then it can render out markdown documents that are then compatible with the Terraform registry documentation site. So all I had to do, it was like this, it was one of those really magical moments of actually building this provider, was generating the documentation. Because you are defining schemas in Terraform, similar to how you would with like protocol buffers or GraphQL or Swagger, Open API specs, Terraform can basically take that same concept and generate documentation for the registry. So that was a really, really nice moment, actually, building this provider, is that documentation just kind of worked. I still need to go through and add in like examples and gotchas and little things like that. Obviously, it doesn't know how to do that for you, but it makes it easy to go. It's a really, really great starting point. Gets you like 80% of the way there. So those are some of the lessons that, I learned in about 20 hours of building this provider. If you watch the first video, I watched it last night to just to make sure some of the things I was saying are right in this talk, and I was stumbling. I'm surprised that anything got built after 20 hours. But once you kind of like realize the Terraform conventions, and you understand that, yes, you are going to type interface a lot, and yes, it's okay to copy and paste code. It's okay to do those things. And you can like start sprinting with Terraform pretty quickly. Once you're kind of over the learning curve, it's a very fast running movement that you can get going. So like in 20 hours, I would say that we went from crawling to walk. And like we're about to run. I feel like I'm about to be able to run with this tool chain. And the way that I recommend that people do this is that find the simplest resources. Let's say you're about to build a provider and you have an API already, and you want to build a provider against it. Find the simplest resources in that API, even if they're not really useful. Even if it's not like the core value your application provides, I would still go with the easiest, simplest resources in the API and build the provider for those first. My other recommendation here, to kind of give you that muscle memory in the crawl portion of building a provider, is build a data source and resource for the simple types. Because it's gonna exercise two portions of that provider for you. And it's just, there are a lot of similarities between the two. So I really recommend like build a data source and a resource. And not only gives you the experience, but it makes your provider a lot more usable as well. I chose, for Fire Hydrant, we have a couple of very simple types. We have service, environment, and functionalities. Functionality is a little bit more advanced, so it was the last of the three. But I chose those because they have a very simple schema. You can see on the right, that's a service and environment. Very simple schemas, very easy to get going inside of Terraform. The very like post, get, delete operations in the API, easy to do. So I chose those first. And about 10 hours in, if you actually go to the 5th video of the series, you can start to see like much more advanced resources getting built. So for example, we have a team resource that was built during the series. And that kind of gave enough muscle memory and honestly confidence to cruise through a bunch of others. There was one episode where we were able to get basically, I think it was like 3 resources in one video sitting of 2 hours. Like that's a lot different than the first video where it's like, what's a data source? Like, I don't understand this. So it was a really nice transition into these much more advanced resource types. This one on the right is actually creating a service and then assigning service ownership to it using another data source. So you can see here, it's actually using another data source in this module. So really nice transition. And by about 20 hours in, the end of the series, this is what we had. We had 6 resource types, 6 data source types. It was published to the registry on terraform.io. Documentation was hosted on the registry, semi-decent test coverage. Remember, quick redo kind of hampered the beginnings of that. And most of all, lots and lots of new knowledge about myself, about the Fire Hydrant API, and of course, the Terraform SDK. So some final thoughts here. The provider SDK is actually really fun once you get the hang of it. Once I started getting the hang of it and really learning the inner workings of it, it became a fun tool to use. I was actually really looking forward to doing what we called Throughput Thursdays, which hindsight 2020, I don't know why we didn't call it Terraform Thursdays. Maybe next time. But seeing an entire Fire Hydrant account get provisioned with Terraform was a magical moment. You can actually see me like jump out of the chair in the video, just watching Terraform provision this entire account. It really was just like those moments that you look for in software, very magical moment. Building a provider against our API provided insights into things we could improve about it. There were a few things in our API that I was like, oh, that's not ergonomic at all. And I don't think we would have really realized that until we started building something super, super serious, like a Terraform provider, something that kind of wasn't in our control against our own API. So that was a nice, effect of this too. And if you have an API, you should have a Terraform provider. It will teach you a lot about it, makes your API that more valuable, and your customers, honestly, will probably love you even more for it too. And that's all I have. How do I do on time? Got 6 minutes left. But I'm Bobby Tables on Twitter, GitHub. We have all the videos. If you want to see this, maybe masterpiece is overselling it, but you can watch the videos, fh.dev/tpt. Yeah, thanks for having me, HashiCorp, and telling the quick story of our provider.
All right, thank you so much. That was actually really cool. And when you were saying like all the videos are available, the first slide when you had like your the coding at the lakes live stream stuff, I was like, that looks really nice and peaceful. So we were, did you say that you
There was about 3 inches between me and the lake though, so I had to make sure to not scoot my chair back, or I was definitely going to go in there. But yeah, it was very peaceful, very fun. I highly recommend people program on a lake if you have the op.
What did you do about the power? Because like I would be very nervous about like being so close to water, because I'd be like, okay, well, what if I do fall in? I'll be extremely like, but where did you get the power from? Do you have a generator?
Yeah, so I actually went to Home Depot and I bought 150 feet of extension cables and I ran it from the house actually down to the lake.
Right. And how did you get the internet connection sorted? I've got all kinds of questions.
I actually, I am shocked that this worked, but I actually tethered the entire time off of my phone.
You must have a decent plan then.
I don't know why that worked, but it did.
Well, it was very, very impressive. I would like to see a recap of it if you could share a link with us.